So today we're going to be talking about how to pick a good book, and there's not much better place to film this than in front of some of my absolute favorites. These are books by homeschooled authors. For those of you who haven't, visit homeschooledauthors.com. It's a website I manage, and it's all books by homeschool students and graduates. And I have found my favorite authors through there. So here's some of them, and some of the homeschool authors I got to meet. I don't have all their pictures up, but I'm been very blessed to be part of that. So we've all picked up a book and gone, oh, what a complete waste of time. I mean, there's no way to completely get away from that. Even I, who know what I like and try to avoid bad books, sometimes just end up reading stuff that just goes, wow, it was a waste. But I could have avoided even more of them, and I've figured some tips out to pick books that I like. And one of the first is not to go with what's popular. And that's any group you get into. I'm not talking about just, what's popular in the world. I'm talking about what's popular in your group. It's very easy to get sucked into what the people around you, your niche, and what's big. What is you must read this book. And I've been part of some very different groups. When I was growing up, I was part of I had a lot of very conservative friends that were reading Isabella Aldrin or Pansy and Elsie Dinsmore and stuff like that, and classics almost exclusively. If the author hadn't been dead and buried for at least 100 years, it probably wasn't worth reading, I think that a lot of these people thought. And I went through a time where most of my friends were reading secular books almost exclusively, and so I've gone through a lot of different friends, different phases as we've grown up, and it's the number one thing I've learned is what's popular is not necessarily what I'm gonna like, and not to be pressured and feel like I have to read what everyone else is reading, because often my tastes differ. I tried Elsie Dinsmore. I didn't like it. I'm really sorry for those who that's their favorite. I just didn't get into it. I've never liked reading secular books. I've dabbled with, I've read a couple, but I always feel like they're empty and hollow, or at least most of them, because what's the most important story to me is missing. And a lot of times what's the big fad is typically not what I'm interested in. A lot of my friends right now are into big, epic fantasy, and I'm just not a fantasy girl. So recognizing, acknowledging, and admitting what you like and don't like is pretty much the first step to making sure you pick up pretty much books that you love. Because really, we have limited reading time. Who doesn't want to stick to what they love? So, ditch what's popular. The second is to take the time to do a little research. And by research, I don't mean spending an hour before you sit down with the book. What I'm talking about usually takes me about 15 minutes in the max if it's a really book that doesn't have a lot of information on it. It usually takes me about 5 minutes to make a judgment call based on or to do my research. The first one is to read the entire back cover or the description on Amazon. Radical idea, I know, but sometimes, all of us, most of the disappointing books I've read is because I failed to read that entire thing, and the first part looks amazing, and then you get to the part about, that part, and it says it right in the description. If I'd just taken the time to read it, I would have been able to avoid so much heartache, or at least just irritation, according to what it is. So take time to read the description. Look at reviews. I typically will actually go, and if it's a book I'm really not sure, I'll look at the 1-star reviews. Most of the time, they're just people who are mad and not worth reading. But occasionally, you'll hit, I avoided one book, and it looked so good, but it had an element in it that would have made me mad, too. And this person was great, had read it and said, I really didn't expect this in a Christian book. And instead of reading it and getting mad myself, I was able to just avoid it by reading the star reviews. Now, I don't read all the reviews. I typically read some of the 1 and 3 star reviews because that'll give me a really good idea of what I might not like. And I skim through those. I just kind of, it doesn't take long. Like I said, I typically spend like 5 to 10 minutes on my research. If it, like I said, if it's a really difficult book, there's not a lot of stuff, maybe 15. The third thing is be willing to stop a book. That's just one thing that I struggle with. It's like if I start it, I have to finish it, right? But one of the things as I've gotten a little bit older and as I've read more, I realize it's not the worst thing to stop a book. My time is valuable. One of the things that I've talked a lot with my siblings this year is that time is our most valuable commodity. It's the one, as I often tell them when we're talking about things, money's the cheapest currency I deal in. Time is the most valuable. And so I want to make sure my time is well spent. And if I start a book and even if it's just one I don't like, I will typically stop it. Now, that's not always true. Sometimes I will read because we all have that book that, we started, we thought we were going to hate it and we got to the ending and we're blown away. So sometimes there are books like that. But typically, if I start it and I don't like it, I will go ahead and stop it. And my thought is if somebody could tell me something about the book later on, I can always go back and reread it, and I have done that a couple of times. But I've also avoided just a lot just by stopping reading books. This is where it's helpful on Goodreads because while I have a fairly good memory of books that I've loved, ones I didn't care for, I typically dump from my mind. So I'll put a note on Goodreads. I won't even read it sometimes. Unless I feel like the author had a lot of talent and I want to leave at least, or I got over halfway through. Sometimes I'll leave it at 3 stars because the author had a lot of talent and it just wasn't my thing. Or sometimes, but oftentimes I won't even give it stars. I'll just put a note on there mainly for me why I stopped it so that when I forget, I can go back. And then I think that probably the biggest key to finding and picking books that you're gonna love is sticking with what you love. I've read some fantasy. I'm not a fantasy girl, like I mentioned, so I don't read much. I probably pick up maybe 2 to 3 fantasy books a year. Sometimes more if there's a couple series, because there are a couple in the kingdom fiction kind of subgenre of fantasy that I really like. But typically I just don't read fantasy. And I don't pick it up on my Kindle, and I don't go seeking it because that's not what I like. And like I said, my time is valuable commodity, so I want to make sure I like stuff that I pick up. I love historical fiction, so I read a lot of historical fiction. I like contemporary, though there's not as much contemporary out there that I like, but so I spend a lot of time in historical fiction. So picking books that you are gonna like, sticking with that genre is good. And I think that one of the other things is also knowing your mood. Sometimes there are times where I will pretty much not like books of a certain type. And just knowing that and avoiding reading those. When you have a friend who has gone through a traumatic relationship, reading a romance novel is usually not a good move for at least me. There were a couple books that I feel a little bit bad because I read earlier in I read it in like mid 2017, and there was a lot going on in our family, and I gave them pretty low ratings because I was pretty frustrated with some stuff. I'm not sure I would change it, but I probably will go back and at least skim through and really see if it was really that big of a deal. So taking that into account is always good. So that's kind of my tips and what I go through to make sure I'll like books or at least have a good chance. But what are some of your tips? Because we all have different methods, and I'm always looking for new ways to learn. One thing I did forget to mention, also, good recommendations for people you know you like. There are some people I will go and pick up a book if they recommended it because I know it'll be good. And there's some people, if they like it, I pretty much know I won't. So I follow both kinds on Goodreads because it's helpful to have both kinds of friends to know what so you like and what you avoid. But anyway, tell me your tips in the comments below and I'll get back to you. Also tell me what books you've read already this year and what they've done. And if you decide to do your own Book Tips Tuesday on your blog, let me know so I can follow it.